Welcome to Teaching Truth About Racism, What Students Need, What's Happening, What We Can Do, presented by the National Center for Youth Law in partnership with the National Network of State Teachers of the Year. We are delighted to have today's discussion moderated by our own Natasha Wilkins, Educator Engagement Coordinator for our Education Civil Rights Alliance. Natasha, welcome and thank you for moderating today's discussion.
Thanks so much, Patty. Welcome to our panelists and to all of our viewers. I am super excited to moderate today's discussion, Teaching Truth About Racism, What Students Need, What's Happening, and What We Can Do. In our conversation today, we'll talk about how important it is for our students to learn the truth, both the things to be celebrated and the things to be mourned about our nation's history and current realities. We'll also discuss some troubling developments in state policies that would impede teaching truth in schools and what you can do to protect our children's access to the truth. So a little bit about me before we dive in. I'm a former high school history teacher and now a full-time advocate for student access to learn the truth in schools. And I do this through my work as Educator Engagement Coordinator for the Education Civil Rights Alliance, convened by the National Center for Youth Law. After my time in the classroom, I went to law school because of inequities like what we're here to discuss today that harm the students I care so deeply about. During my time in the classroom, I taught in a school that was in a predominantly African-American community and in a low-income zip code in Memphis, Tennessee, where every statistic said that my students should not make it. However, through the power of teaching my students about realities such as the slave codes, Jim Crow, redlining, legal segregation, and presenting them with historically accurate information that allowed them to understand how the past is inextricably linked to the present, I watched many of my students go from being disengaged to engaged. And I watched them begin to see themselves as valuable in the American narrative for the first time, rather than as the villain. And that sense of value and worth changes everything for a child. During one lesson, one student told me that he'd always thought that being Black meant he was bad, and that for the first time, he didn't feel that way. And I learned in that moment that access to the truth empowers students to believe in themselves and to believe in the power and resilience of humanity and the ideas of our nation, such as liberty and justice for all. And so the truth is, when we teach our children the truth about our nation's history, they do not shrink back and hate our country, as some are saying, but rather they see the vision of what we could be and take up the mantle to move us forward where past generations have fallen short. And so I'm excited to hear from our awesome panel of educators and advocates today as we talk about that very thing. And so our first educator that we'll be hearing from today is Josh Parker, who was a Maryland Teacher of the Year. Also joining the conversation is Jemelleh Coes, Georgia Teacher of the Year. And we're also joined by Matthew Hawn, who was terminated from his position as a classroom teacher for teaching truth to his students in Tennessee. We also have my colleague, Miriam Rollin, who directs the National Education Civil Rights Alliance, convened by the National Center for Youth Law. So welcome to all of our panelists today. All right, so with that being said, we're going to dive into our discussion. And Jemelleh, the first question is for you. Can you start us off by sharing what we're talking about when we say we need to teach truth to students and to provide culturally affirming education for our kids? And can you also share with us why that's important?
Absolutely. So when we're talking about teaching truth to students, we are talking about exposing them to the rich history of our nation, the rich history of them individually, thinking about their cultures, their backgrounds, their experiences, various characteristics of humanity that they encounter every single day, things that they are thinking about intentionally and things that they are experiencing without intention. So really, we are talking about opening the world to students in the broadest ways possible. So one way that we do, so I teach now at the college level. This month is Black History Month, so I always make sure that infused in the education of my students, I teach disability studies, but infused in that education is specific attention to Black people in this month of February. So at the beginning of the semester, which is in January, I always ask my students, what do you know about disability? How much about disability have you learned? Every single time, students are like, nothing. we have learned nothing about disability. Every now and again, I'll get 1 or 2 students. That happens in January. In February, when I start to really infuse thinking about Black people and the history of our nation related to Black history, I ask the question, how much about Black history have you learned? This year, I've had students to say they have never even heard that Black history was a thing. Black History Month was not even on their radar at all. But what that does for students, it gives them a distrust of the systems that were charged to educate them. So they get to me after never having heard anything about disability, never having heard anything about Black history, and then they are left to wonder, what else don't they know? What else haven't they been exposed to? As educators, particularly in the K-12 classroom, because not everyone will get to post-secondary education, right? So it is incumbent upon the people in the K-12 education systems to be able to expose students to all of the things that they do not know. The other thing is that students know when we're being abstentious in our teaching. They know when we're not teaching them something. And what they do is they go and find that knowledge. Without someone to help guide them through that, they may not be learning about it and thinking about it as critically as they could if they had a guide in that work. So it's extremely important that we are able to walk students through that so that they can create the society that we know we all want, one where everyone is accepted and everyone is valued, and they can be who we hope that they will be.
Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on that, Jemelleh. Matthew, same question to you. Can you share what you think of when we're talking about needing to teach students truth and to provide culturally affirming education for our kids and why that's important?
Yeah, I'm muted. Hi, thank you for having me. Just to sort of add on to what Jemelleh said, that was a great answer. Speaking from my perspective as a contemporary issues teacher, we look at issues and problems that we are facing as a society today. And it's part of my job to challenge our students to solve these issues. Well, how can we do that if we are continuing to segregate voices and perspectives from our K through 12 curriculum? You know, we are expecting our students to go out into the world and solve issues without the full perspective of how we got here. And that's unfair to them. We have to give them the tools to be able to navigate their life as adults and to improve our world, the world that we are leaving them. And so I think it's extremely important that we start to include the perspectives from people and groups who have been historically marginalized.
Thanks so much for your comments, Matthew. Miriam, we're going to ask you the next question. So we just heard Jemelleh and Matthew both talk about how students don't know how we got to where we are today. And there is this already lack of information that they're getting in K through 12 classrooms to help them make sense of the world around them. What do you see happening with state policies related to teaching truth? And are they moving in the direction of making things better?
Thanks, Natasha. Well, there are some states that have moved in recent years in the direction of teaching truth and utilizing diverse and culturally affirming curriculum materials in classrooms, and that includes California, Illinois, New York, Oregon, Virginia. But we're still pretty far from where we need to be in that respect in most places. And tragically, since the spring of 2021, about a year ago, state laws that impede the full teaching of truth were enacted in several states, including Arkansas, Idaho, Iowa, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and 2 in Texas. One wasn't enough, apparently. Also in 2021, there were state boards of education or state attorneys general that have taken action related to this issue in Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Montana, Ohio, Utah. Thankfully, in 2021, state bills were vetoed by the governor in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and overthrown in the courts in Arizona. This year, in 2022 so far, we're tracking legislation that impedes teaching truth in over half of US states, including bills on which there was legislative action just today in 4 states, Indiana, South Carolina, Tennessee, Ohio, and other states with legislative action just since February 1st. That's just this month, just in a couple of weeks. That's Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Missouri, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Virginia, Wisconsin. So a lot of bills. And what do these bills look like? So what are they actually doing? Well, what do they prohibit the teaching of? Well, they vary somewhat across states, but they often share eerily similar provisions, almost like it's an orchestrated campaign on the far right's part, which it is. So what are some of the things they ban? So CRT, critical race theory, the 1619 Project, divisive concepts, systemic racism, white privilege, unconscious or implicit bias, non-binary pronouns, race or sex stereotyping, or vague concepts like causing guilt or anguish to persons solely because of their race or sex. And these bills have an impressive array of punishments for violations of these censorship provisions, including against educators, fines, adverse personnel actions, even occasionally criminal liability, and against schools and districts, fines, removal of state funds, even property tax exemptions for homeowners in punished districts. And there are also an impressive array of gotcha mechanisms in these bills. So that includes tip lines by phone, by email, by web, requirements to post all books, materials, lessons plans, etc., online, and video surveillance in some cases, and even in-person surveillance of teachers in classrooms. There are further huge bureaucratic burdens, even beyond that, on teachers, schools, districts, superintendents, and school boards, including new review processes, new complaint processes, new appeal processes, etc. And most school districts already have a review committee for these materials. They already have complaint processes. But these bills would, first of all, expand them to the point where our public schools wouldn't be able to operate in some cases. And secondly, many of these proposals take authority from schools and districts locally and actually center power in state politicians. So what has all this resulted in? Well, some book banning, in one case, book burning recently in Tennessee, teacher firing, and you'll hear tragically from Matthew about that. But most widespread is self-censorship by educators, schools, and districts. An intended, not unintended, intended result of these policies impeding truthful education for our students. So that's what I'm seeing.
Thanks for your comments, Miriam. Josh, we're going to pose that same question to you. So equity is a key part of the work that you do as an educator, as I believe it should be for all educators. And so what are you seeing as the impact of these policies from the educator perspective?
Well, in working with educators, the work that I do with NCYL on that committee, I've seen truth become rare. I've seen the teaching of truth be a decision instead of a habit, right? I've seen the teaching of truth be something that has been weaponized. And so you heard from Miriam in terms of all of those laws that are in place that are really custom designed to attack truth and to not make it as plentiful as it can be. When truth is censored, lies become the culture. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about and what I've seen is that when lies become the culture, there are so many things that can happen as a result, right? There's so many things in this country where the degradation of people that look like me has been based on lies, right? Lies then, when they become the culture, need to be justified. And the justification becomes the basis for the dehumanization. And so what we see then is that teaching truth isn't just about whether or not I can teach truth or I can teach the full counsel of something. It's a life or death issue. Because in that vacuum of truth, there are so many things that fill in the gap that makes it dangerous for people. I was just watching a video where there were two young men that were fighting in public, one black, one white, and they were teenagers, and teenagers fight, by the way. Not that I condone it. When the police came in, they arrested the black person. The both were fighting. And what I'm saying here, the point is that like that police officer used to be in a classroom. And that police officer is growing up in America. And so what we want is we want more people to go through classrooms so they can understand that the lies that are out there about African Americans or any indigenous, any other type of person, like they have to be combated with the truth so that everyone can flourish and live their life on their own terms. And so I'm seeing these laws have that chilling effect, but that chilling effect doesn't just stop at teachers not teaching. There's this pernicious cascading effect on what people, students deem as acceptable behavior with people. If I believe enough lies about a certain group of people, it makes it easy to objectify them. Truth humanizes, which is why it's important to continue to do it.
Thank you for those powerful comments. And I do want to remind our viewers that we are using the hashtag teaching truth. So if you hear something that you like, go ahead and drop that hashtag on your social media and spread this message. Again, some of those things we just heard about teaching truth being weaponized. And I do want to say that truth is not political, although this is something that is being politicized. The truth is the truth. There is no such thing as an alternative fact. The truth is the truth. And this chilling effect that we are seeing on what is happening in classroom teachers is not only extending to what teachers can say or educators can say, but it's also having a chilling effect on people coming into the field and those who can stay in the field. And so, Matthew, we're going to turn to you now for our next question. You've been an educator in Tennessee for several years. And can you tell us a little bit of what happened in your high school class last year? I believe that was their contemporary issues class, which is super important. There's a lot going on in our nation today that students don't understand. For a young person, we're seeing rates of suicide be extremely high as they're in this world where so much is happening around them that they don't understand. And the classroom is a safe place where they can have those discussions. And so can you tell us what happened in your contemporary issues class last year and what has happened to you since?
Sure, yeah. So in 2020, in the fall, it was a difficult time for teachers with COVID. At my high school, we were involved in hybrid learning, and we were recording our lessons and posting them to our Google Classroom. In late August, during the events in Kenosha, in a contemporary issues class, I made the statement that white privilege is a fact. And I challenged our students from that point forward. Our lesson goal or our unit goal was going to be, how do we solve the issue of racism in the United States? I posted that video to the wrong class, to a personal finance class. A parent complained, but they complained about my statement that white privilege is a fact, which led the director of curriculum instruction for high school to remind me about the Tennessee Teacher Code of Ethics that says a teacher shall not deny students access to varying points of view. We shortly went back to virtual learning, I believe the following week. And because this is such a difficult subject and the students need to be in person and I need to be in person with them, I stopped talking about that unit because at that time we didn't know when we were coming back, and I was hopeful that we would be back in maybe November or in the second semester. We remained virtual all of the rest of fall of 2020. And when we came back, we had a group of people trying to overthrow the United States government. And that was the first time in my life I had ever witnessed anything like that. And I was not sure how to teach it. So I decided that I would give some historical context to our students, and we would look at the 2016 election. I asked the students, what were some reasons Donald Trump got elected? They gave a lot of great reasons that we were going to look at, but I assigned a perspective that students in Northeast Tennessee typically wouldn't get or wouldn't hear from, and that is Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay, The First White President. A parent saw that and emailed our district admin and my school admin and complained that I was continuing to deny students access to varying points of view. There was also some language in the piece, words spoken by the chief of staff at the time, Steve Bannon, and the president himself, and that made its way into an official reprimand on February the 3rd. I was reprimanded for denying students access to varying points of view and assigning material that was inappropriate or used inappropriate language for high school students. I believe that my due process was violated because no one from the district office called me in to ask me about it, to ask about my unit, to see where I was even going with the lesson. I lost that appeal and I went back to teaching. Fast forward to April of 2021, and my class, like the rest of the world, we were watching the Chauvin trial. And prior to that, because I'm a type 1 diabetic, I had been teaching from home, and I had finally gotten back into the classroom with my students for the first time, and I was so excited. And I thought it was time that we could examine some of these more difficult issues that we face as a country, because I was actually there in the classroom with them. And one of the things I pride myself in is creating a classroom environment that is safe and that allows for students to discuss things and in a very friendly manner. And so during that Chauvin trial, we were watching it in real time because this is a contemporary issues class and it was a very important subject. We have been talking about implicit bias and defunding the police and all these things that students have questions about. Like, our students want to learn and know about these things. During a discussion while watching the trial, one of the students brought up white privilege. And I said, well, what is that? What is white privilege? And we began to discuss that. And I found some materials from some people who are a lot smarter than me. We read and discussed Professor Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And then we watched, and something I like to do in my class is I like to use powerful pieces of art. And there is a poem entitled White Privilege by Kyla Janae Lacey. And it is one of the best examples, best definition of white privilege I've ever heard. I showed that in class. It had some language. I attempted to mute it, and immediately someone complained. And then I was called in to a meeting with my district. I had the meeting, and then a week later I was fired, the same day that the state of Tennessee passed its anti-CRT legislation. And since that day, that was on May the 5th in 2021, I've been appealing it. I appealed in front of an impartial hearing officer who sided with the school. I appealed in front of the school board who hired the person who dismissed me and voted to continue with this dismissal. I appealed before them, lost that by a count of 5-1. There was a board member who voted with me. And now I am appealing to Sullivan County Chancery Court. And this process is going to take a while. And it's been emotionally, physically, and mentally draining. But, I'm here with you great people. And there is some opportunities that have come out of this. So I'm happy to be in the fight.
Matthew, thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. We deeply appreciate you being here and you being so willing to share this process with us as you are still going through it. And we do hope that this turns out in your favor. We are hearing, and what we just heard Matthew say, we're hearing that students need a safe place to process what is happening in the world around them. For children, what is happening as we're seeing things like the insurrection that happened at our Capitol, or things like the Chauvin trial. Our kids don't have the history and the background to really understand where this is coming from. And so as a child, this is all so unsettling. They don't know where to turn or how to find answers. And the classroom provides a safe space where they can process those things in a way that can help them push through the mental frustration that they are feeling as they're trying to make sense of the world around them. And so we're going to give the next question to Josh, and then we're also going to ask Jemelleh and Miriam to weigh in. But Josh, thinking about all that we've just heard, what can educators, parents, students, and other community members do to support teaching truth in our schools?
Thank you for sharing that, Matthew. I know it's it's tough to share something like that, and I just really appreciate your vulnerability on that. I think the first thing, some of these solutions might sound self-evident, but I'm just going to share some of them. First is to teach the truth continually, right? Teachers, we have a lot of power, and we also have the power of choice. And so teach the truth. Continue to do what you know to do. I understand that's easy. I'm not in the classroom, and I understand the pressures that are there. But there is a moral obligation, and also, I believe, a sort of ethical responsibility to teach what is there, okay, and what is around them. Secondly, and I think you should do this with care, you should also explain the truth to your the teachers or the parents of your students, to community members. Here's what we're teaching. Let's have a conversation, dialogue about this in a way that's good faith. Now, don't get into situations where you're arguing with people about what is actually true, right? That's not the role of it. But you do want to say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what I'm teaching. Here's the reason why I'm teaching it. And here's the important part. Explain to them how it's going to make their children better. An argument that continues to come up in this manufactured sort of fight that now is real in many ways is that somehow children are going to be worse off as a result of this. I think it's important as a teacher and as a spokesman and someone who's with kids for a long time each day, explain how this has the potential to make them better. Oftentimes when I am having a conversation, I can think of the times in my classroom where I've had a conversation about what is really happening out there and in the world, and how that opens up my kids to another sort of level of critical thinking, a newer level of maturity, right? A newer way to contribute to the world. We want to raise children who are able to contribute positively to the world and to make it a better place for them and everyone else. And I think that the mission and the purpose for why teaching truth matters needs to be held front and center. And we need to remember that, right? Because when you can align on values in so much as it's possible, you're able to then really promote what you're doing and create allies who used to be enemies. That is not the case all the time, not easy to do. But I think if we can remember the reason why we're doing this, and that the children are actually the point of this and their development, right? Now, when you find an ally who maybe used to be an enemy but a true ally, then you invite them into the process. I think that's another way. Like, as you build alliances, you start to build a protection and a momentum for this to change, because that's what has been happening, but in the reverse. So I would say for community members and other advocates for this work, build strategic alliances, right? Principals, be willing to support your teachers. Assistant principals, be willing to support. Like, if truth isn't worth risking it, then what is? right? Also, at the final analysis, you're going to have to look back and reflect on whether you were complicit in the creation and the contribution of what kids know and understand to be true. Children aren't just automatons, right? That are factory widgets. They're fully involved human beings. And with that, they are impressionable by the adults who are in their lives. So what do you want to have on your record? That you knew the truth and didn't protect the teaching of that? Or that you risked telling the truth and providing an opportunity for the truth so that kids can become better people? Last thing I want to say with this. When you provide an atmosphere for truth to be told, you also make it more able and freer for children to tell you the truth about what's going on with them. Another epidemic that's happening in our country is children committing suicide, being depressed, and other. So truth actually has this explosive possibility that people can be freer to be themselves. So truth then, you share truth, you get truth. So this is more than just about teaching about what really has happened and what is happening. It's about creating an environment where kids can be their true selves and can be in a place where that truth is valued and honored as well. So I think if we share those messages and show the fruits of truth, we'll be able to gain more people to understand what it is that we're really trying to do. And if we mess up, if we say things that we thought were true, but then found out not to be true, be learners too. Teachers have to model being learners because truth also is progressive, right? What was true right before, now that I have greater context, I can understand where else this truth can be applied. So I think we model it and we continue to come with confidence, but with the humility to continue to learn. And I believe that is a way in which you can gain alliances and also more people that can be allies and co-conspirators in our cause.
Thanks for your comments, Josh. And again, I want to remind all of our viewers that you can drop that hashtag teaching truth if you're hearing things that you like to raise awareness about this issue. Also, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and drop those in the chat on any of the platforms that you're on, and we are more than happy to answer those questions near the end of our time. So again, that hashtag is teaching truth, and you can drop any questions in the chat. Jemelleh, we're going to pass that same question to you. What can educators, parents, students, or other community members do to support teaching truth in our schools?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Josh always puts things so eloquently and outlines exactly what we need to do. So thank you, Josh, for that. I'd like to echo a few things that Josh said. One is teach the truth no matter what. That's what my personal opinion is make them fire you, make them do the work, right? Make them make the hard decisions because they can't fire us all. Everybody's not trying to teach right now, right? That's what I want to tell you to do. But I know that that is difficult. I know it is difficult to say that I'm going to do this thing that may cause me to not be with students. So I know that, I feel that, I hear that. So then what I want to say is find ways to teach the truth without it ruffling feathers, without it being as egregious, without it being as direct, because there's something about directness that is very difficult for people to digest. But if we can find ways to make the truth just habits in what we do, habits in how we speak, habits in our own dispositions, students can see that. And the other thing that we can help our students to do and watch our students do is let them teach the truth. Let them guide us. So I had a friend, and what she said was, follow the children. They know where the light is. And they do. So if we expose them to just general thoughts, general ideas, they will ask questions. And when they don't ask the questions, we can ask the questions. But allow them to do the teaching, allow them to do the thinking, and then help them connect it back to humanity, connect it back to the human spirit. What does it mean to be a part of the society? What does it mean to think about what we can possibly be? So if we can do that for children, I think we can get we can get to a better place where truth just becomes a part of the ethos of what we believe and what we do. And another thing that I've seen very recently is that communities of parents, communities of other community members, stakeholders, they can come together. Right now at my daughter's school, that's exactly what's happening. There was an incident where a LGBTQ student's drawing was taken down. And what happened as a result was that the very next day, there were rainbows everywhere throughout the school. And there continues to be rainbows everywhere throughout that school, because there's a power in community, and there's a power in parents, and there's a power in the collective saying that this is what we want, and this is the world we want to create for our students.
Thank you for your comments, Jemelleh. Miriam, same question to you.
Thanks, Natasha. And I really keep reminding myself, never follow passionate educators like Josh and Jemelleh and Matthew. So my bad, lawyers should never follow that. But I just want to say, first of all, to echo some of what's been said already, look, schools are there to help prepare our students for their future, for our community's future, for our nation's future. So what do they need in order to do that? Well, critical thinking skills, problem solving. What do employers want? What do businesses want that want to hire those kids? Critical thinking, problem solving, cooperation, collaboration, which requires empathy. So these are all skills that teaching truth and challenging students to think about what they're reading, to think about what they're hearing, and to see different perspectives on issues, that is all a part of teaching truth. Now, there are some things that, I'm sorry, there isn't another side on. The Holocaust was bad. There's not another side on that. So you want to have both sides of issues that have two sides, but when the truth is the truth, you got to teach the truth. And so, but that's what our future employers are looking for in our kids. That's what our kids need in order to fulfill their dreams and their destinies. And in terms of what can people do, look, I'm a policy wonk, I'm a lawyer. So I'm going to tell you, speak out to your policymakers, right? Like if there's bills pending in your state, speak out against them. This is not the direction that we want our kids' education to go in. This is not what we want for our future leaders of tomorrow. So speak out, whether that's, writing to your policymaker, emailing them, doing testimony, doing an op-ed, doing a letter to the editor in your local paper, doing social media, whatever you feel comfortable doing, but speak out. Your voices are needed to be heard in this. There is a very small minority who are being very vocal, and we need to have the voices of reason, the voices who are pro-truth speaking out and making a difference so that we do not keep going in the wrong direction. And we can again turn our sights towards where we want to go. More diverse curricula, more inclusive curricula, more culturally affirming pedagogy. And that's where we need to go.
Thanks all of you for your comments. Matthew, I have one more question for you before we wrap up our conversation. So we heard a lot about how parents, students, and community members can get involved to make a difference here. And we've heard a lot about some of the concepts of what can happen when you teach students truth, but you are in the classroom actually doing that work, making that lift. Can you share an experience that you had with a student, perhaps, where you saw the power of teaching truth?
Yeah, throughout the course of my career, I can't tell you how many times I've had students come back to me or message me or text me or call me and say, thank you for exposing me to new ideas. Thank you for preparing me to go out into the world and be able to understand someone else's point of view. In a discussion about white privilege, in class, I had a student share an experience. And I think maybe it was the first time that they had realized what was happening. They are biracial and went to the airport, and that student had been searched every time they were at the airport, and it was 6 or 7 times. Their white family passed through each time. And I think for the first time in my class, that student got to see or hear from someone else, like a Kyla Janae Lacey, that experiences the same thing. I had another student say to me that who has graduated, and this was just about a year ago, but they had been graduated 3 or 4 years, and they said, you know what I learned in your class? I learned that it's okay to change my mind, that I don't have to stick to an idea. And one of the things that I always tell my students is, look, it's okay to be wrong. Being wrong gives you the opportunity to learn something. So you change that into a positive experience. You weren't wrong. You just had an opportunity to learn. And I think that's, what we're missing out on if we continue down this path.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience, Matthew. And so as we wrap up our conversation, I do want to say that what we've heard today, none of this was about critical race theory. So much of what is happening right now are people saying that critical race theory is being taught in classrooms and saying that we need to stop that. None of what we've heard today is about that. This is simply a matter of teaching truth and making sure our students have access to learn the true history of our nation so that they can feel empowered. Learning truth not only empowers the students that are seeing themselves for the first time in curriculum, but it also empowers students who see themselves all the time to understand others' perspectives and experiences and understand how our nation got to where it is and why we see the disparities we see and what we can do to really make our nation live up to the ideals that we all stand for, that we all want to see our nation achieve. And so this is such an important issue for our students and for our nation's ability to address crucial challenges like racism, like gender discrimination, and all the other things that we all want to see addressed. And so thank you so much to our wonderful panelists today for your time and for your comments. And thank you so much to all of our viewers who joined us today. Again, use that hashtag teaching truth to drop anything that you heard to raise awareness and really help us defeat these bills that are not doing what is best for students, because your voice matters. And so I'm going to turn it back to Patty.
Thank you, Natasha. And thank you to our panel for this very powerful conversation. This has been Teaching Truth About Racism, What Students Need, What's Happening, What We Can Do, presented by the National Center for Youth Law. We want to extend special thanks to today's event partner, the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, as well as our event sponsors, Kravith, Latham & Watkins, LLP, and O'Melveny. Stay tuned for more information about the next NCYL Live on March 23rd. This concludes our event. Thank you.